Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're out at the range to talk about how to properly use iron sights. There are a lot of new gun owners out there that have bought rifles for the first time that don't understand how to use iron sights. There's shooters that have had rifles for years but have never used iron sights because when they bought their rifle, they bought a red dot sight or an LPVO or an ACOG or something like that, and they never took the time to learn how to use iron sights. And I've been told by multiple young Marines that when they were in boot camp, they weren't even taught how to use iron sights on an actual firing range. They were taught the theory of iron sights, but they weren't actually ever put on a firing range and taught how to use iron sights actually shooting their rifles. They used RCOs or their version of the ACOG, and that's what they qualified with. And I find that pretty interesting. Again, we have so many new gun owners, and there are so many people out there that have become so reliant on red dot sights and magnified optics that they've completely ignored learning how to use iron sights. And it's perhaps arguable that iron sights are like manual transmissions. They're neat options to have if that's something you want because you enjoy rowing your car. Iron sights aren't really necessary anymore. A lot of gun companies manufacture guns and sell them without sights in the box. You'll just get a pick rail and then you can choose what you want on the gun in terms of your sighting options. So today we're going to talk about iron sights, how to use them. We're not going to get into how to zero your gun. There are plenty of videos out there talking about how to zero your gun, whether to use a 25 meter zero or to use a 50 meter zero. That's all covered ad nauseum, but we've chosen to do this video because doing a quick search, we didn't find any videos that really taught you the principles of how to use those iron sights. Now we've brought out two different types of rifles. We're not going to focus on these particular rifles. What we're going to focus on are the different types of sighting arrangements that they have. We have an AR-15A2 that uses an aperture sight system, which means you have a peep sight in the rear, a circle, and then you have a front post out in the front, which on the A2 is square. Then I've brought out an AK74. This has a rear sight that's moved further forward, uses a notched rear sight, and then again you have a front post out here in these protective ears. So these are the two different types of sighting systems we're going to talk about. These are probably two of the most common sights encountered out there, especially if you're buying a new AK. They typically do have sights on them. ARs, you have all sorts of options. So let's get into the video and start talking about how to use your iron sights properly. Guys, please swing by and check out Big Daddy Unlimited, BDU. They help support us here at the Military Arms Channel with products and things like that so we can continue to bring you content. There's a link in the video description down below that'll take you to the Mac blog and website. Please follow that link, and from there you'll find a link to Big Daddy Unlimited and try them out just for 99 cents. You can see what they're all about. In essence, they're just like a big online store that has amazing prices. So please, again, check out BDU. Okay guys, welcome back to the Target of Truth and the Wand of Wisdom. We have two different types of sight pictures here that relate to the firearms that we brought out here this afternoon that represent two different very common sight pictures or sighting systems on military rifles. On top, we have the aperture sight, and that means you have a hole in the rear. It's a peep. It's a complete circle that you're looking through. And then we have a front post out here. This is very similar to what you will find on rifles like the AR-15, A1, A2, and A3 and A4 with their carrying handles. You'll also find a similar sighting arrangement in terms of what the sight picture looks like when you talk about rifles like the FAL and guns like that. So even the PE-57, which we recently did a video on. So this is an aperture sight system. Now, pardon my drawings because I'm not an artiste. I screw things up, so that's why this post is black and this one's just kind of a wireframe, is because I screwed this up and had to color it in to cover up that screw up. So please pardon my inability to draw. All right, so this is what your sight picture should look like. And the first thing I want to stress are these protective ears. Ignore them. They're not part of your sight picture, generally speaking. There's no reason to include these or worry about these in your sight picture. They're simply here to protect the front sight from damage should the rifle be banged around. So while you can see them, that does not mean you should use them for aiming. What you should do is focus on this front post and make sure that the front post is centered in your field of view through the rear aperture sight. So if I draw a crosshair through here, you'll see what I'm talking about. That front sight should be in the center of the aperture rear sight. Now, the human mind is wired in such a way that we naturally want to center things. So when you look to that rear peep, when you align that post, your eye will naturally want to center that post in that rear aperture view. And then all you have to do is move that sight onto the target. From there, there's sight alignment, sight picture, breathing, control, slowly pull the trigger, and bang. We're not going to get into the whole concept of marksmanship. We're just focusing on how to use the sights, all right? So down below this drawing, I have how I use my iron sights. This will vary. Some nations will put the front post on the bottom half of the target. I like to aim at the center of mass, which you'll hear me refer to as COM, C-O-M, center of mass. So I'll put the front sight center of mass and basically cut the target in half with that top post. Now, when you're talking about windage using iron sights, some rifles like the A2 have the ability to make adjustments on the fly. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend doing like what they had with the M16A1, which is a fixed rear sight and front sight. You zero the rifle and it was good from 50 yards all the way to 300 yards or meters. So that is the sight picture I prefer to use. Okay, so now when it comes to windage versus dialing it in, what you'll do is what we call Kentucky windage. Now I like a front post like that's on the A2, which is a square front post. The A1 had a round front post that was kind of tapered and still usable, but not my preferred type of front sight. I like the perfectly square sight with sharp edges, and then that allows me, with that flat top of the sight right here, I can, at distance, move my target slightly left or slightly right and compensate for wind. So keep in mind, as you shoot further and further down range, the wind is going to push that bullet one way or the other. And so when you miss, if you use a dead hold like this is what I call a dead hold or center mass hold, COM. If you use that center mass hold and you're shooting 200 yards and you go off the right edge or go off the left edge, it's likely due to wind, assuming you have your rifle properly zeroed. Okay, so let's take the AR-15A2 over to the shooting table and do a little bit of shooting at 200 yards using the iron sights of the rifle. First, I'd like to thank our friends over at Federal for supplying the 223 ammunition, the American Eagle, that we'll be shooting this afternoon. We're going to fire 10 rounds because the crisis is still going on, that being the panic buying of 2020, and ammunition is still very hard to come by. So we'll only be shooting 10 rounds per firearm. So now that we're behind the A2, we have the rifle all set up. Again, we have that rear aperture. What we're going to do is get on the rifle, get as close as you can to that rear sight that's comfortable. And then you're going to hard focus on that front sight post. So you're going to look through the rear aperture. You're going to center that front sight post, which should come naturally. And now I'm going to hard focus on that front sight and then move it over to the target. So that front sight is nice and sharp. And the target out at distance still should be easily seen. So it depends on how your eyes are and how old you are and things like that determine how easy iron sights are to use. For me, I can still use them quite easily using the method I just explained to you. I'm going to go ahead and load the rifle up. Now, I will shoot with both eyes open, typically. The only time I'll squint this left eye is when the sun's coming in at such an angle that I get too much glare or that it's hitting my eye and making it difficult to get a good sight picture. That's when I'll close that left eye. Typically, I'll shoot with both eyes open when I use iron sights on rifles and pistols, both eyes open with a red dot sight, both eyes open even when I'm shooting magnified optics. That's because it gives me my situational awareness. If I close one eye, I lose half of my peripheral vision. With both eyes open, even when I'm on target, I can still see what's going on and moving over here to my left. So if something moves, it can get my attention very easily. All right, so we have the weapon loaded. We have a challenge target at 200 yards. I'm going to square myself to the rifle. I move it forward. I have the bill of my cover I can use to shade that rear sight if I need to in bright sunlight. And other times I can just bring my face back just a little bit because I don't need to use the cover of the bill of my cover to protect that rear sight from the sunlight right now because we have really good lighting conditions. Right? Hard focus on that front sight, cut the target in half with that front post and squeeze the trigger. Easy 10 for 10 at 200 yards. So I prefer the Aperture rear sight. For me, that's always worked better. But the next type of sighting system we're going to talk about is very usable, has been used for a very long time, and is still commonly found on modern firearms that are being sold out there that are generally AKs at this point. All right, we're back to the target of truth. I want you to ignore this drawing for the most part. All right, so the AK has a sight picture that looks much like this. Basically, it looks like a handgun sight. You have a notch in the rear, a blade with a notch, and a front post. And just like the AR-15, the AK is going to have protective ears around that front post. Ignore them. They are not part of your sight picture that you need to worry about. You just need to worry about that front post. You'll notice that down here on the larger picture, that front post, the top of it is flush with the top edge of the blade. And a normal sighting picture, again, calm, center of mass. I'll cut that target in half with the front sight post. And that's what my hold is. Now, once again, in doing this, I can shift left and right holds, just like I talked about up here with the AR-15, simply by holding a little bit left and holding a little bit right to compensate for things like wind. You don't have the ability with most AKs to make adjustments to windage. The RPK has quick adjustment for windage, but the average AK and AKM and 74, they will not have the ability to make those adjustments on the fly, which is a good thing. You need to learn how to use Kentucky windage, which is what this practice is, holding a little bit left or holding a little bit right to get onto target, depending on the conditions that you're shooting in. So it's not unnatural or uncommon to have light on both sides of this front post. The only thing you need to worry about is that the front post is centered in the notch and the top of the front sight is flush with the blade of the rear sight. And then again, whatever hold you zero your gun to. Once again, I use the center of mass hold. So now that we've talked about the rear sight on the AK, let's take the Definitive Arms AK over to the table and do a little bit of shooting, again, at 200 yards. Once again, I want to stress that we're not focusing on the firearms that we're using out here this afternoon. We're trying to show you general practices based upon different sighting systems. It's not really tied to the actual firearms that we're using out here. For example, the AK has this rear blade and front post, but that's very similar to rifles that were used in World War I, bolt action rifles like the Mauser. Our own 1903 Springfield, before the A3 modifications, had a sighting system just like this, where you had a rear blade and a front post. So it's not just the AK we're talking about here. I know that people like Rob Ski will tell you to use a belt buckle hold, not a center of mass hold like I use, but use a belt buckle hold. It's up to you, the shooter, to zero the rifle based on how you want to use that rifle. So I've always used a center of mass hold, but understand that other people will use different holds. And so you pick what's right for you, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and load up some Red Army Standard 545 by 39 into my Definitive Arms AK here. It's an AIM-74. It's a beautiful build. And once again, we're gonna get all set up here. I'm focusing on that front sight post being flush with the rear blade. I'm ignoring the protective ears of the front sight. I'm cutting the target in half at 200 yards. Okay. So, which one's better? Which type of sighting system is better? That's up to the individual user. There's some people that will prefer this type of aiming system, and there's other people that prefer an Aperture style. Also, with AKs, you can buy rear sights. I think Krebs sells one and other companies that takes this blade and V-notch and turns it into an Aperture. And some people prefer that even for rear sights that are moved forward, like on the AKM. I know I wasn't going to get into marksmanship and the principles of shooting and things like that outside of just the sight picture, but I want to show you how I shoot the A2 typically. When I come out, I like to shoot from the kneeling position quite a bit when I'm not using the bench, and to do that, I'll use a sling to help steady the rifle. And this is what I call a tight sling. I'll put my arm through, wrap it around once, then my hand comes through and rests on the front handguard. Now I can tighten the sling by pulling my hand back towards the receiver, and when I do that, it tightens the sling around my arm, forcing everything into alignment, and it allows my bones to support the rifle and steady it almost as if I was shooting off a bench. You guys get the idea. Iron sights can be a lot of fun. If you don't have a set of iron sights on your rifle, but if you can put them on there, I recommend going out and picking up a set of good iron sights because it, again, is a lot of fun, but it also has practical application just in case your sights fail, that being your red dot sight or your magnified optic. Guys, we're supported by you, our viewing audience. We aren't supported by the gun manufacturers or importers. If you'd like to help support us in our mission to bring you information like this, please consider becoming part of our Patreon family. There's a link in the video description below. Also, right here on YouTube, there's a little join button underneath the video player you're watching right now, either on your mobile device or your desktop. Click that join button and you can support us right here on YouTube. And last but not least, guys, please swing by and check out Copper Custom. Thank you for 12 years of support, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Last 2 rounds. We'll see you guys later.